Hey students, I am going to make a couple quick videos to refresh your memory about some of the things we've learned about using Google Sheets, this spreadsheets application. So looking at the results from our survey, we have the results of how many questions? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 questions. And on this first sheet, I have them all together. It's a lot of data to look at one time. So what I've done is separated the data, basically copied each question onto its own sheet. So I know I'm not going to need that first one. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So what I'm going to do is this tab at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to right click or two-finger click and just go up to delete. And it reminds me, hey, this data is going to be gone. That's okay. You cannot delete a sheet with a linked form. Please unlink the form first. Oh, well, never mind. All right, starting over. Hello, students. What I'm going to teach you today is how to use Google Sheets to analyze both numerical or quantitative and non-numerical or qualitative data. So out of these 11 survey questions that we did in our survey, I have a lot of data here, but what I've done is I copied the data from each individual question onto its own spreadsheet. So I have 11 different spreadsheets here with different information, and I'm going to pick two that I want to work with. So the first one, our survey about anxiety, well, this has data that's not numbers. So it's non-numerical or qualitative data. I definitely want to use that one. So let's start with that. I know, because we designed this question together, that there are 5 different ways students can respond to this question on the survey. What I'm going to do is I'm going to count how many students responded in each of the 5 different ways. So I'm going to make a data table here on the side, and I'm going to separate each response, and I'm going to count how many students responded that way. So slightly more frequently was one of our options, and I'm going to intentionally put them in order here. The same frequency was another option. I'm just copying and pasting right now. Much more frequently was another option. Let's see, much less frequently. That was also an option. And slightly less frequently was an option. So now I have those all in my table. Now to count how many times a student said much less frequently, there's a function I can use, and it's called COUNTIF. So just start typing in the cell with the equal sign. Equals, that tells Google Sheets that I'm going to enter a function, and that can be either simple math or one of the functions like COUNTIF. Now with the COUNTIF function, when I start my parentheses, the first thing it wants is the range. So I'm going to enter the range, starting with cell A2. Why cell A2? Well, let's look at column A, row 2. That cell is the first cell of our data set. If I started with A1, that cell has the question in it. That's not part of my data, so I don't want to count it. So I'm going to go cell A2 and then colon to the last cell in my range. Well, I know because I have 160 responses that cell 161 is the very last one. But what if I had a very long number, 7,176 answers, but I didn't know that and I didn't want to scroll to the bottom? I can just tell it A2 colon A. And it knows that that means start at A2 and go to the very last entry in column A. So what happens if we scroll down and look at what's selected in yellow? It goes all the way to the bottom of column A. It's everything in column A. So start at A2, go to the bottom of column A. Then enter a comma, and now it wants our condition. Or what are we telling it to match? Well, I want it to look for every cell that matches much less frequently and count those. So I'm just going to select this cell C3, column C, row 3, and close my parentheses. And now my function is done. So what this says, this function that I wrote, here we can see it up here in the function bar. It says equals COUNTIF. That means, hey computer, I want you to count all the cells in a given range that say a certain thing. And then the range here in yellow. Computer, I want you to start at cell A2 and go all the way to the end of column A. And then I want you to count all the cells that match what's in cell C3. And that's what it's going to do. So let's hit enter. And it counted them. There are 15 cells that say much less frequently. All right, let's do that again for slightly less frequently. I'm going to start with the equal sign. I'm going to type COUNTIF with no spaces. Now look what it's telling me. It's suggesting something. Do you want to do COUNTIF starting at A3, go to the end of column A and match it to C4? Really close, but not quite. I want to start at A2 again. Go to the end of column A, match it to cell C4, and see how it outlines cell C4 in purple? It makes sure that I know which cell I'm matching. So it outlines my range, this yellow dotted line. It outlines my condition with the purple dotted line. And I know it's going to go through those 160 cells and count every one that says slightly less frequently. Let's see how many there are. 17. Really good. Let's do it real fast. Equals count if A2 to the end of A, match it to C5. Now check it. Our range is outlined. Our condition is outlined. Hit enter. 29 students said the same frequency. Now you might be thinking, Mr. Schulke, we're just writing the same thing over and over basically. Can't we copy and paste it? Well, let's try it and see what happens. I'm going to copy and then I'm going to paste. Now let's look at what happened. I'm going to click on the formula here, or the function in the function bar. Our condition is correct, slightly more frequently. Cell C6 is what it's trying to match, but look at our range. Our range is starting with cell A3, because when I moved down one row to paste our function, it automatically increased the number of each row by 1. It changed C5 to C6, and it changed A2 to A3. So I need to go back and change that 3 to a 2. There is a trick that you can do to make sure that no matter how many times you copy and paste or where you copy and paste to, that any part of this cell's address, basically, will stay the same. If I want that 2 to stay the same no matter what, I can put a $sign in front of it. Shift key in number 4. Put the $sign in front of it. Then when I copy and paste it, that 2 will stay the same. Let's try it. Copy, paste. And look at that. It still says a $sign 2. That means it's stuck on row number 2. So no matter how many times I copy and paste, it'll stay the same. All right. Now I've counted all of the responses here. I know that there were 160 students. There's a way that I can add these up and make sure that they add up to 160. We can use the sum function. So I'm going to type that equals SUM. Enter the range. Here, this time I'm just going to click and drag because it's a small range, 5 cells, D3 to D7. And look at that, 160 students. Really good. Okay. Now with this data, I could make a couple different kinds of charts. First, let's make our table look really nice. Let's put some borders on our table. This is the border button. And let's shade it. This one that looks like a paint bucket with paint spilling out of it, that's our fill color. So let's use these lighter shades of background colors to shade in our table here, make it look nice. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I know that if I highlight our data table, there are 2 ways that I can make a chart. One is the insert chart button right here. It's the one that looks like 3 columns on a column chart inside of a box. Click that. and it'll make a chart. I can change this chart from a pie chart to a column chart to a horizontal bar chart. But let's start with a pie chart. Let's look at this pie chart and see what's wrong with it. Well, we included the sum in the data that we were selecting. So it made a slice of the pie for our sum. We don't want that. How can we fix it? So one way we can do it is right-click on the chart and go to Data Range. Now see over here on the right in the chart editor, there are all these options. And it has this data range in here. What happens if we click that? Well, it asks us what cells we want to include. So it's starting at C3 up here and going all the way to D8. What happens if I just highlight the stuff I actually want to use? Just click and drag like this, click and drag. And now it's going from C3 to D7 and selecting this data here. Click OK. Look at that, it fixed our data. Now, from this chart, I can tell that slightly more than a third of respondents said slightly more frequently. Slightly more than a quarter said much more frequently. I should put a title on this. Anxiety, changes in anxiety frequency during distance learning. And see that red underline under the word frequency, that red squiggle? That means I spelled it wrong. Make sure you catch those and fix them. All right, now I have a pretty good chart. I could insert this into a report or a project or something and use that. Let's make one other kind of chart with this. What other kind of chart would be useful? I think we could use a column chart to display this data. So there's another way to add a chart. Instead of using the Insert Chart button, we can go to the menu bar, this bar of menus at the top, and we can click Insert and go down to Chart. And the same thing will happen. A chart will appear. Let's change it to a bar chart. Let's call it Change in Anxiety Frequency. Look at that, spelled it wrong again. During distance learning. And now we can see, based on this bar chart, our axes are labeled. This is the response, much less, slightly less, the same, slightly more, much more. Now you see the importance of putting them in order in our data table. And here's the count for how many students said that. And we can see that a lot more students said more frequently than less frequently. So that's a very useful figure as well. So we can use both of those. And those are the ways that we would analyze some non-numerical data. It's one way to look at qualitative data, turn it into quantitative data, and then analyze that data and represent it in charts and figures. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Practice those tools. We learned about the COUNTIF function. We learned about the dollar sign. We learned about changing the data range in your table. We learned several things from this lesson. So I hope that you have fun practicing and using spreadsheets. You can do so much with spreadsheets. It'll make science and math much easier for you.